How's your production on pasture? Are profits down? Are weight gains down? What are you going to do about it? Do something cost-effective. Do something that will make a difference. To add the first and proven leader in feed-through hornfly control to your cattle rations, ask for it by name, Alticid IGR.
Your land is more than a business. It's a heritage that has been passed down from those who tended it before you, by those who shaped it, changed it, and cared for it. Your land has a legacy, one that you carry on, but also one you build on. At Corteva Agriscience, we are the stewards of a lasting legacy. We have a responsibility to Dow AgroSciences to maintain the relationships and trust they built, and to build upon those foundations, to help you care for your land, to provide innovations that help you protect the hard work and investment you've poured into it, to help you build a legacy that can be passed on for generations to come. Corteva Agriscience.
Ranching is passed down from generation to generation. Know what else gets passed down? The world's finest ranch and rodeo equipment, manufactured by WW Livestock Systems. Ranchers demand quality, and they have come to depend on WW equipment to fulfill their needs, large or small. We invite you to consider WW, made in America, available coast to coast. WW Livestock Systems, the world's finest since 1945.
Good morning and welcome to Producers Co-op Everything Ag Expo. This morning's session is Electric Fence Basics with Ray Williams from Gallagher Animal Management. He is a Learning and Development Manager. Ray trains dealers, producers, and end users on electric fence construction and provides technical support for all Gallagher products, including weighing and electronic identification systems and related software. So we would like to turn it over for Ray for his demonstration.
All right, well, thank you so much for that, and I appreciate being here. And Gallagher, on behalf of all of Gallagher, we are just elated to be a part of the Producers Cooperative Association event. And so without further, we want to move on into our presentation. Again, my name is Ray Williams with Gallagher. I've been with Gallagher for about 10 years now and have worked with producers and dealers, as mentioned, all across the country and Canada. And so we thoroughly have a great team out in the field that call on our dealers and work with producers everywhere. So we're going to talk about electric fence basics. Electric fence defense 101 is really just talking about why and how this works so well for many different producers across the country. So in essence, electric fence, it's a safe and short, memorable shock that creates a psychological as well as a physical barrier. Now, nobody likes to get shocked, right? I mean, we always remember when we get hurt. So when an animal touches a fence line, the electron passes through its body, goes into the ground, and then follows a path all the way back to the ground rods to make that connection back to the energizer. And in that split second, that is when the shock occurs. If there's a condition where the ground is sandy soil, or there's not enough moisture in the soil, sometimes an electric fence is not as effective because of that type of condition. So we have to make improvements and changes to the way we ground.
Ray, this is Jason over at Producers. We see your kind of working presenter view. Can you swap us to the actual presentation view?
Oh, certainly.
Didn't mean to get you off beat there.
No problem. I'm glad you said something there. All right. Let's try this one here.
Perfect. That's it. Thanks.
That's the one we want. All right. Well, great. Well, we won't recap, but just to kind of go on from there, but the electric fence sent through the fence wire is 1 pulse per second. And from the energizer, which is grounded, and then the animal touches that we talked about, the shock is memorable and it never forgets. As we move on into why do we use electric fencing in the first place? Electric fencing is really reliable. It's cost effective. It's a great way to control animal movement and manage pastures. And keeping animals in, keeping wild animals out, protecting your herd, and separating different groups of animals, rationing crops and pastures, and fencing off eroded areas, trees, rivers, roads, ponds, whatever you've got to keep them out of those areas that you don't want them in as well. One of the key things that we really talk about across the Midwest and the country, and even in dry areas or areas where there is lots of moisture, it's about how to correctly pasture manage your herd on grass. It's effective, and it results in potential feed and greatly improves the feed quality and yield. It's efficient. Direct harvesting of grass and fodder crops by the animal with manure, returned directly into the soil during the process. And the use of a combination of permanent and portable fencing can really maximize your grazing area control. So pasture management and rotational grazing. Maintaining great pasture at the high growth tilling stage ensures that young, lush, and green pasture with high protein and energy levels grazed at the rest for the right amount of time creates the ideal conditions for grass growth when plants reduce leafy shoots from the base. Protecting pastures is really key in using electric fence effectively. When the animals eat down too far, it doesn't give the plant growth and the root growth the opportunity to come back. So giving that timing and looking at the timing of pasture management is so critical to an operation who has, let's say, a lack of grass, or grass that has been recently planted, or let's say in some of the areas around the country that they've had a burn or some kind of a grass fire. You want to keep animals off of that, so it gives the growth the opportunity and the roots to come back. These various grass varieties, there's various grass varieties to suit different environments, and longer term options last 10 years or more. Shorter than term can give an extra yield over a shorter time frame. And forage crops like turnips, kale, sorghum, and etc. are low cost and can help. The rotational grazing can help with that. So let's get started with what is involved in electric fencing. So it's a power system, a fencing system, and selection of these depends on the property size and the fence usage and the animal type. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. One of the first things that I ask customers all the time who are inquiring about fencing, or even in the aisle as you're starting to sell fencing, is what do you have for a reliable power source? We need to determine that, because 110 volts, plugging it into the wall is certainly the best option that you could use for an electric fence, because there's so much more potential power behind the energizer. Now, obviously, in those situations where a battery is required, or even solar, it's just a little bit more expensive to run an energizer, or energizer cost up front is a little bit more costly, just because it's more portable. But keep in mind that 12 volts and solar replenishment is definitely a way to go if your system is remotely located. And how much fencing are you going to be doing? One of the qualifiers that we always ask folks is, how far and how long is this fence going to be? Is it an existing fence? Are we trying to do a perimeter fence? And then within that perimeter, are you going to be doing cross fencing to do the pasture management like we were going through? And those all influence the size of the energizer. And we've got an energizer literally for just about every application that you could want. So you don't have to overbuy, or rather underbuy an energizer in that situation, so you can find one that works just perfect for what you're trying to do. And what is your location? Grounding is a critical part of any fence system. Good power transfer, like we mentioned early on, drier areas need a different fencing setup and more grounding to compensate. And solar energizer options are perfect for remote and with good sunshine. But let's come back to that grounding issue. In drier climates and drier areas, Texas and others, sometimes the grounding isn't as effective coming through the ground. So we resort to other types of fencing, setups where you would have a ground in the fence itself. So when the animal touches both the hot wire and the ground wire goes right on back to the energizer and gives the full effect of the energizer. All energizers are rated in joules. Now, this looks complicated, and joules is very, very difficult to explain sometimes, but broken down quite simply, a joule is the amount of power potential. So let's say we talk more about what happens inside the energizer. The capacitor that's inside the energizer builds up power. It then transfers it through a transformer, which then boosts the power with very low amperage to a much higher voltage. Because you know that the average energizer produces about 7,000 volts with very low amperage. And the amperage is what really hurts us. So like in your 110 volt energizer, or your 110 volt outlet in your home, there's usually 15 to 20 amps, and that's dangerous to be touched. It's not something, but we're talking milliamps or less in most situations with electric fence. So it's very, very safe to use, but it gives a very sharp and memorable shock when the animal touches it. So then we talk about stored and output joules. Now, a lot of the folks that sell energizers across the country, they rate their energizers, all of them rate their energizers in output joules. Some do store joules, because what happens is that the stored joules that are inside the energizer are not necessarily the same as what comes out of the energizer. And not to overcomplicate this, but sometimes there's a bit of a translation issue when it comes out of stored joules, and what is going out of the energizer can be a little bit less. So what we like to talk about with our energizers is what you're going to get, output joules. What's going to really be the power that comes down the line, and how far that the energizer is going to push that power. And so just quite simply, the energy builds up and that capacitor reaches a set level. At that stage, it's permitted to discharge into the transformer, and then it takes and raises that energy while it reduces the amperage. So let's talk about your fencing system now. What do you want to achieve with your fencing? Determines whether you're going to be permanent or temporary subdivision. So as part of the this designing and setting up of a fence line, look at what you've got to work with. And if you've got a permanent outside fence, what was it going to take to salvage that? Maybe you've got an older property, an older fence line, and you just need to put an electric fence on it to stabilize and keep your animals in. Gallagher and we sell a variety of products that can help you get that permanent perimeter taken care of, so then you don't have to necessarily replace your physical fence in some areas if it's down and such, and it provides either a permanent or a temporary situation for that. And then once you put up your good perimeter fence, then as we mentioned, you can go out from that and create subdivisions within your property area. And then how long do you want it to last? That kind of helps us determine whether we're going to use different types of products like high tensile wire or poly wire or turbo wire. In most situations, we're going to talk about the high tensile wire being your best conductive product to put out on a fence line, and it goes the longest distance and with the least amount of resistance. But sometimes it's not practical to do that, and you need to use a poly product. So the turbo wire that we sell is going to allow you to go a long distance, but with a turbo product that has 9 pieces of metal in the wire itself, in the weave, so you can use it for cross fencing and that type of thing, and it really is effective. And then thirdly, what kind of animals are you going to kind of try to keep in or keep out? It really influences the setup, like the number of wires and spacing, impacts the choice. For example, horses have special requirements. If you're trying to fence out predators, as an example, we're going to talk about a fence line that has more wire in it. Sometimes the wires are going to be spaced closer together at the ground, or maybe closer in the center. Depends on what you're going to be trying to keep out. Wild hogs and things like that are very destructive, and there's a certain way to put a fence up that would actually be a deterrent for them. While in equine properties, visibility is everything. You don't want the horses to get close enough to the fence or to go through a fence line. So we put in larger ropes and things like that that help the animal to see where the fence line is at and keeps everybody safe. For cattle, cattle are pretty easy to contain most of the time. 1 or 2, 3, maybe at most fence lines are all required for that. And some producers up north use 1 wire to keep animals at bay. Once an animal's been trained on an electric fence, they don't normally forget it. And so it's really important to create a fence line that your calves and your smaller animals have been trained against, and then of course they'll stay away from the fence most of the time after that. Gallagher provides a tremendous number of energizers and a wide assortment. And one of the things that we just try to look at when you're selecting an energizer is when you know that you're going to be able to plug it into a wall, we're just looking for the joule output and the number of miles that you have available to you. So in an instance like this, where we're looking at an M120, which represents a mains or 110 volt unit, and it's 1.2 joules, and it'll go up to 6 miles or 30 acres. Now that's an average fence, Sometimes it'll be a little bit less, a little bit more. Just depends on the situation. If you've got a lot of weed intrusion and grass buildup around your fence line, sometimes you need to buy a little bit larger energizer to push through all of that. But as you see, we have a variety of fencers that go all the way up to 90 miles or more, depending on what your application is. So don't be afraid to buy a good energizer that's going to go a little bit farther than what you really need, because that gives you more potential to push through a lot of that resistance. For those property owners that have large situations going on, our largest fencer, as you can see up here, is the 10,000i. Now this is a 100 joule fencer, which translated again will go 125 miles or more and 3,000 acres of normal fence line. So as those are, we sell a few of those in a year, but I'll tell you what, in those circumstances where you've got lots of cross fencing, lots of rebuilt fence along the way, these are fantastic products for that. And they're very manageable. They have lots of accessories that you can put on it, from being able to get a fence report on your phone, as an example, or being able to control it remotely. All of these fencers in here have that capability. And you can buy one that fits the need that makes the most sense to your property. In situations where you have a small property or a garden, we sell these 2 battery units that allow you to use a 12-volt battery or even D-cell batteries. This little D-cell battery unit is ideal for a garden around a 50-foot square, and helps lots of homeowners that have small patches, keeps out raccoons and all kinds of little guys, rabbits included, by just putting the wires a little bit closer together and then tying it up to a ground rod right here in the corner, as an example. It has a wire that comes off the bottom of the unit. You simply click it right to the wire, and you're energized. Don't be fooled by the size of this little energizer. It will produce up to 7,000 volts. And lastly, the solar energizers are widely used around the country for remote areas and such. All of our energizers are sold with batteries on board. No longer do you have to buy a separate battery for the solar units like this. They're all self-contained and shipped with the battery on board. And as you can see, they're not as long. I mean, the output distances are a little bit less than the electric ones, but still, again, for most applications and most properties across the country, this is ideal, up to including the S400, which is our largest all-contained solar product that'll go up to 60 miles and 280 acres. Recently, Gallagher introduced a multiple powered energizer. Now these energizers are great because you can use them both with adapters. You can use them in a power situation where you can plug them into the wall, or you can use a battery and then couple up a solar panel to it. So we have those accessories available to you, and obviously this is just a really ideal product for those properties that have a lot of different uses for their systems. Grounding your energizer is probably one of the most controversial things that we talk about when folks call in and ask us for advice on their fence line. And we maintain these particular measurements that up to 15 joules, you need at least 3 ground rods, and not just any ground rod. We want you to use a galvanized ground rod that is spaced 10 feet apart and then connected with 1 wire all the way back to the energizer. Anything above 28 joules, you want to go up to 6 and up to 12 rods, depending on the size of the energizer. Don't be afraid. This is a low-cost part of your system, because nothing happens, no shock occurs, until that electron finds its pathway back to the energizer and makes the connection. It's like a huge magnet. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a few seconds here. Gallagher offers 2 poly products that are excellent. The first one is polywire. Now this is ideal for short distances, around a small yard, a small acreage, But again, it's not designed to go the longer distance. It only has 6 elements of wire in it, and of course, again, it's a value product, so it's not as expensive as some of the other products that we sell. But I'll tell you what, it'll get you done if you need a smaller area done. What we hang our hat on, though, is turbo wire. Turbo wire is 40 times more conductive than polywire is, and it'll go the distance all the way out. You can use it for miles of fence line, lots of cross fencing. It's ideal for doing pasture management as well. We also sell ropes and turbo ropes and pre-wound reels that you can buy in the stores, where you can just buy and go. They are already wound up. You can connect an energizer to your reel, as an example, and the whole entire reel is completely energized, and you just reel it out and reel it back in when you're done moving animals across the pasture. The larger ropes are, again, designed for equine purposes, so your horses can see, and it's an awesome way to go. Testing your fence, gosh. A lot of folks that we talk to on the phone, they call us up and they say, you know, my fence isn't working. I touched it and I can't feel anything. And what we mostly look at, now this illustration on the right-hand side here is not quite accurate, obviously, because the guy's pictured in the air, which again, when you're touching your fence line and you don't feel the sensation of the voltage that's coming through it, take a look at the shoes or the boots that you're wearing. Because the electron has to, again, pass, just like an animal, has to pass through your body and get to the ground before it gets back to the energizer to create the shock. So I've had customers call and they get all upset with me because they just can't get their energizer to work, but we'll put a tester on it as an example, and it'll say 7,000 or 8,000 volts. And I'll go, well, I would be careful what you're doing there, because had they taken their shoe off or gone to a knee on the ground, the outcome would have been a lot different. And I've had people do that to me. They've actually taken their shoe off and touched the ground, touched the fence, and then I hear all kinds of profanity and all kinds of things that happen behind the scenes there. So again, get a good tester. We have testers that just do basic electrical or voltage readouts, and then our fault finders actually help you find the short. And how those work is that there's a path of electrons going to a ground. So what it reads is the direction of where the electrons are going. So you put it on the fence line, an arrow appears, and you follow the arrow until the arrow disappears. And then you go back and you'll find the ground or the short right there. Now, it does show that there is lower voltage when you have a short on your fence line, obviously, and then higher amperage. So when you do that and you look for a troubleshoot, this will save you a lot of time. We have a lot of guys that have like 2 or 3 of these because they're just invaluable to save you from having to walk your entire fence line. Common fence mistakes is usually because of insufficient grounding, not enough power, or just not using the right wire. So I've got a little piece here I want to kind of explain a little bit more about those 3 common mistakes. Electric fencing is really an excellent tool to grow your business and improve your land when used properly. However, there are 3 mistakes that are commonly made with electric fencings, which are costing you time and money. They are insufficient grounding, not enough power for your needs, and using the wrong wire. Avoiding these common mistakes will ensure that your fence does its job with minimal upkeep, keeping your livestock safe and your farm functioning well. Let's take a closer look at these mistakes and learn how Gallagher can help you solve them all. Poor grounding is probably the most common cause of fence malfunctions, probably because it's the hardest to see. Basically, your ground system acts as a magnet to collect the energy put out by the fencer. The more ground rods you use, the stronger the magnet. If you have a higher power fence, and if you live in an area with few minerals in the soil, you'll have to create a stronger magnet. Think of your fencer as like a heart. It's sending energy out through the arteries to the ground system, and then it collects that energy and sending it back to the fence. And just like your veins bring back oxygen depleted blood back to the heart, the circuit must be completed for a healthy functioning system. If the veins cannot bring back that depleted energy, the performance will fade or stop altogether. And since we can't see this aspect of the electrical circuit, it's wise to follow these basic rules of 1 ground rod for every 5 joules of power. And then 3 ground rods are considered the minimum to account for soil variations and climate fluctuations. Placing ground rods 10 feet apart is ideal, so each ground rod creates a 5-foot diameter catch field, and then connecting all of the ground rods together back to the Energizer with one continuous piece of wire ensures the energy is not lost and the circuit isn't broken. So to recap, 10 ground rods 6 feet apart, 6 feet deep, and 1 wire to connect it all. Just spending an extra $30 to $100 now on materials will save you potential insurance deductibles later if your fence stops working or something happens to your animals. Fencers are not cheap. And for the job you need them for, you don't want them to be. The secret is to get the one that does the job and lasts a long time. Just like when you select a truck or tractor for the heaviest load you plan to put on it, you want to select a fencer that is able to handle the heaviest load that you plan to put on it. All of the fencers are rated in joules, which is power. The amount of power you need depends on the distance that you're covering and the type of animal that you're managing and the amount of interference you expect. Think of a 4-wheel drive versus a 2-wheel drive. If you don't plan on cleaning your fence line at least a couple of times a year, get a 4-wheel drive, so to speak. That is to select an Energizer for the distance and the animal type and buy the unit above that. Nobody likes the price tag up front, but it's a fraction of the cost of the herd that you're protecting. Gallagher has a 3-year warranty and lasts far longer. Selecting the right power level for your needs is the investment sure to pay back dividends. You will not regret the time savings and the peace of mind knowing that your fence is set up and working properly. The type of wire that we use makes a huge difference in the effectiveness of electric fence. And the main wires that we use are high tensile wire, turbo wire, and just regular poly wire. It may be easiest to think of your electric fence system as a circulatory system. The fencer is the heart, the wire are the arteries. Most of us understand that to keep blood flowing properly to our arteries, it should be clean and clear of plaque buildup in our arteries. And that will slow blood and causing poor circulation problems in the extremities and causing our hearts to work harder. The same is with electric fencing. Just as some of us are predisposed to circulatory dysfunctions, each type of wire is inherent to an amount of resistance. It's version of plaque buildup that affects the flow of current. So stick with the circulation analogy again. High tensile wire is your healthiest wire in terms of resistance. It's your healthy eating triathlete. Turbo wire is a recreational runner. It's able to perform steadily in a decent endurance and can enter an occasional race. Polywire is like the rest of us. We can only sprint if we're being chased but are unable to go long distances. If you want your fence to perform, set it up to run the race you have planned for it. Follow the steps that we've outlined today and ensure that your fence works the way it should. When it comes to over-the-counter exchanges, your fence is guaranteed, especially the smaller ones, to work all the time. If you have a problem, we have allowed our producers to come in and exchange over-counter, and Gallagher will fully support that. But it's rare that it has to be used, but in those circumstances, it can be used. So you're completely covered. And also, when we mentioned the 3-year warranty, our Energizers can be repaired, their modular designs, in and out, and have them right back to you as soon as possible. So keep in mind that Gallagher has been in business for over 80 years. We've been doing this a long, long time, and we create products that are engineered for the long term. I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with me today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Gallagher at our website. We have our 800 number, and of course, you can contact me directly for any questions that you might have about Gallagher or any of its products.
This is Jason back over at Producers. I've got a couple of questions in the questions and answer box. Don't know if you can see those. If not, we can read them to you.
Yeah, go ahead and read them out loud. I'm so sorry I couldn't see them.
Okay, we have one question. What is the expected life of turbo wire?
Most circumstances, turbo wire will last at least 7 to 8 years. We've seen it in the field for longer. It's heavily UV protected, so it's not going to break down as readily as some plastic products. It's the same material that we use for all of our insulators, and our insulators are guaranteed for 10 years as well. So we just use the same fiber product, and we just spin it out and create the weave that goes into the turbo wire. We can hold our hat or hang our hat on that, and we've had absolutely great results with longevity on our turbo wires.
Okay, the next question is, can the old 12-volt 7-amp long rectangular batteries fit in the new battery units?
It depends. Rectangular, so it's yeah. In fact, that is true. There are quite a few of them that'll fit that 7-volt. There's a threshold where it goes up to a little bit more, but for the most part, yes, those rectangular batteries will still work in our products.
It looks like as an extension of that question, it says, I guess what prompted that question to be asked is customer just bought two for my two 15-year-old units, only for them to last a week or so. I have replaced units, but it doesn't look like these batteries fit.
I would have that customer reach out to me directly, and let's discuss their particular situation and figure out what happened there. And we'll be happy to help troubleshoot that issue. The fact that they didn't last but a week, that's deeply concerning. So we need to really look at their whole system and figure out what happened there.
Okay. I think that's it. That individual said that they're going to reach out this afternoon. Had another
Perfect.
question.
Yes. Yes.
What do you do at a standard 16-foot gate in the middle of the electric fence?
A standard 16-foot gate, normally we would go underground with a direct burial cable. I hope I'm answering the question right, but is that what they're asking? It's in the middle of is it a metal gate perhaps, or is it a wire gate? But normally to go underground with a direct burial cable, it's high voltage cable. So it'll keep the voltage going as you come up out of the ground and connect it to the other side of a 16-foot gate. And it's you use a good clamp to clamp it on the one side and come underneath the ground. We usually bury that cable about 6 to 8 inches below. I mean, depending on the moisture and such too, because you wouldn't, if it's used a lot, you would want to go a lot deeper than that. Some people put it in conduit, but it's not necessary in most situations. Just come up on the other side and keep on going.
Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in right now. I think that might be everything. Tyler, you see anything I'm missing? Okay, well, we're going to hand the mic and camera over to Andy, who works for us here in our fence yard, managing the fence yard. And these are his products, and he's just going to sign us off for this session.
All right.
Ray, thank you for all the good information that you shared with us.
Oh, that's my pleasure.
Any questions at all, or like to get in touch with Ray or the outside field sales rep for Gallagher or myself, just feel free to contact us here at the store, and we can answer any questions that you have. We thank you for tuning in with us today, and please stay tuned for the next session.